Michael, in writing this book, I wanted to paint a very clear-eyed picture of what a second Trump administration would look like if he retook the White House, and again, what it would look like if a copycat took the White House. So rather than people just listening to me and what my opinion would be from my 2 years, in the executive branch during the Trump administration and dealing with the man, I wanted to go interview other senior officials that worked with Trump in the White House and at every department and agency, every major department and agency, and senior Republicans on Capitol Hill, and ask them and their words to describe what Trump would have won, what he would have done if he won re-election, and what he would do a second go around. The Doomsday Book was one of the more alarming things that I was told, and this had never been reported previously. And here's the short version of the story: is in 2020, as Donald Trump was getting closer to the re-election, he could have potentially accessed a tool that would have allowed him to cement a coup. Now, what is this tool? Well, there's a little known book, this book called the Doomsday Book by national security officials, that's kept at the White House for the most extraordinary moments if the nation's under threat: a nuclear war, an armed foreign invasion. And it's the responsibility of one top staffer on the National Security Council to protect this book. Now, when I was doing interviews for Blowback, I was told that they actually went out of their way to try to keep the president from being aware of the contents of the book, from being aware of the most extraordinary powers that the president has in those circumstances, because there was worry in the White House that Trump or one of his MAGA allies would try to misuse those national security powers. And then there was this extraordinary moment in the lead up to the election where the White House almost installed a MAGA loyalist named Christina Bobb into that job on the National Security Council. Now, some of your listeners may know Christina Bobb as one of Donald Trump's current lawyers, someone who was on the One America News Network as a hardcore MAGA, talking head. And she was almost placed in that position. Now, what the White House did not know is that if they placed her in that position, she would have had access to one of the most sensitive emergency manuals in the entire government, this Doomsday Book. And as we later found out, Christina Bobb was involved directly in the efforts to overturn the election. Thankfully, this was thwarted. People stopped Christina Bobb from getting named to this position. But we were basically that close from one of Trump's closest allies from knowing he had these extraordinary powers, which he could have easily deployed to prevent the transfer of power in 2020. That was something really worrying to me. And it made me think back, Michael, to when I was still in the administration and Trump thought his most extreme power was the Insurrection Act. He'd been told about it. He called it his magical authorities. And at one point in 2019, he wanted to write in the State of the Union that he was invoking the Insurrection Act to go deploy the military to the border to stop migrants from coming in. But if he had done that, which we stopped him from doing it, but if he had done that, there's no telling where he might have used his Insurrection Act powers. And of course, as we know, Donald Trump clearly had an interest in doing that potentially on January 6th.
Right. So describe it, though, in terms of non-emergency situations. And I bring that up because, you don't need, with Donald, to have an emergency situation, meaning you don't need to have an attack upon America on American soil. Donald will deem anything to be an emergency situation if it affects him. So just if you can, give me like a non-emergency situation that Blowback describes in terms of how he would use this, this doomsday scenario, this doomsday book.
One of the worries from the people that I talked to, and again, keep in mind, these are people who'd been appointed by the Trump administration on his National Security Council. The folks that I spoke to are worried that in a second term, Donald Trump would use these powers to influence elections. So, for instance, he might target social media companies that are opposed to him. And if the information that's in my book about what allegedly is contained in the Doomsday Book would allow someone like a Trump to potentially do that. So hypothetically, he could cut off access to an internet provider or a social media company that wasn't friendly towards Donald Trump. He could, as one interviewee told me, deploy the military to the polls to intimidate voters not to vote for the political opposition and instead support the MAGA side. He could potentially go and hunt down innocent people and political opponents and actually jail them under some of these authorities. I mean, this is the type of stuff, Michael, that you would imagine in some B-movie plot about a dictator overtaking the United States. But the authorities that are, again, allegedly contained inside the Doomsday Book would potentially allow a Trump to act like an actual autocrat and to exercise the powers that he wanted to. And that deploying of troops onto U.S. soil is something I heard again and again when I talked to people. In fact, there was this story that I was told, and I'd had some connection to it early in the administration, about Trump wanting to build his own mercenary army in the United States. So everyone's familiar with the Wagner Group in Russia that Putin has. Well, Trump was jealous of the Wagner Group. He wanted his own private army. And in the course of the administration, he tried to get aides to greenlight a proposal to work with military contractors to create his own private army. And this is something that defense official told me Trump will pursue in a second term. He will want to stand up his own mercenary group that's accountable to him. So he doesn't have to worry about the U.S. military exercising a conscience or the oversight committees on Capitol Hill. He wants the authority to tell these troops where to go and what to do, including deploying them on U.S. streets. In fact, a former top counterterrorism official from the Trump administration called it a junior Gestapo. That was his worry, is that if the president had been allowed to do this, it would have been a junior Gestapo. And next go around, they won't be prevented from trying to stand up these structures.